There is a weight to certain kinds of silence. It's not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping house or the comfortable hush between old friends. No, this was the silence of a door being closed. A final, chilling silence that had filled my small apartment for weeks. It was the silence that followed the sound of a single, typed letter being slid under my door. An envelope that felt less like paper and more like a slab of granite, cold and unyielding in my hands. My name was typed on the front, Joyce Morgan, but it felt like someone else's name. The Joyce who would receive this envelope was a Joyce who no longer existed. She was the daughter who had failed, the dreamer who had dared to dream too big and in the wrong direction. You see, for my parents, Arthur and Eleanor Morgan, life was a series of checkboxes. A predictable, straight road from a good school, to a sensible job, to a suitable marriage, all within the confines of our small Ohio town. Straying from that path wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal. And I had strayed. Oh, how I had strayed. While they envisioned me in a crisp business suit, navigating the world of finance or administration, I was covered in charcoal dust, my fingers stained with ink, my soul lost in the lines and shadows of a sketchbook. I wanted to create. I wanted to study art. To them, the word art was synonymous with poverty and instability. It was a frivolous, selfish pursuit. A hobby, not a life. The battles were quiet at first, conducted over meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Then they became louder, echoing in the hallways of our family home. The final, terrible argument happened the night I told them I had been accepted into the Cleveland Institute of Art. I had saved for years, working 2 jobs alongside my community college classes, and I'd done it. I'd won a partial scholarship. I was so proud. I was so naive. My father's face, usually a mask of calm authority, had turned a frightening shade of purple. You would throw your life away on this. This doodling, he had roared. My mother sat weeping silently, her tears not of pride, but of profound disappointment. We didn't raise you to be a starving artist, Joyce, she whispered. We raised you to have a real life. The last thing my father said to me, as I stood with my suitcase by the door, was, "You walk out that door for this foolishness, Joyce, and you are no daughter of mine. You are on your own. Completely." And I walked. My heart felt like it had been shattered into 1,000 sharp pieces, each one cutting me from the inside with every step I took away from the only home I'd ever known. That was 3 years ago. For 3 years, I built a life in the shadow of their disapproval. My apartment was a small, shabby place above a laundromat, but it was mine. I waited tables at a diner where the coffee was always fresh and the customers were always in a hurry. The tips were small, but they bought me pencils and paper. My life was a relentless cycle of work and study, fueled by a stubborn hope that one day, I could prove to them that my choice had meaning. That I had meaning. I missed them every single day. I missed my mother's lemon cake. I missed the way my father would meticulously tend to his rose bushes in the backyard. I ached for a phone call, a letter, any sign that the door hadn't been locked forever. And then, the envelope came. It had no return address, but I recognized the typewriter font. It was the same one from my father's old office machine. My hands trembled so violently I could barely tear it open. For a wild, glorious moment, I thought it was an olive branch. An invitation home. Perhaps they had finally come to their senses. Perhaps they missed me too. I unfolded the single, crisp sheet of paper. The words were typed, formal and cold. To whom it may concern. This document serves as formal notice that Arthur James Morgan and Eleanor Rose Morgan hereby disown Joyce Elizabeth Morgan, effective this date. We renounce all familial ties and responsibilities. She is no longer considered our heir or descendant. All claims to any future inheritance, property, or familial association are hereby severed. Signed, Arthur J. Morgan. Eleanor R. Morgan. It wasn't a letter. It was a legal document. A disownment paper. They had typed it up, signed it, and sent it to me like I was a tenant being evicted. The paper fluttered from my numb fingers and landed face up on the scuffed linoleum floor. The words disown and severed seemed to bleed into the room, poisoning the very air I breathed. I sank to my knees, the sobs tearing from a place so deep within me I didn't know it existed. This was it. The final, official end. I was truly, utterly alone. The dream I had fought for, the art I loved, suddenly felt like a cursed, hollow thing. What was the point of any of it if it cost me everything? Graduation was in 2 weeks. I had worked for it, struggled for it, bled for it. But now, the thought of walking across that stage filled me with a dread so profound it was physical. There would be no one in the audience to clap for me. No proud smiles. No flowers. Just a hollow ceremony marking the culmination of a journey that had cost me my family. I almost didn't go. The morning of the ceremony, I stared at my cap and gown hanging on the back of my closet door. They looked like a costume for a play I no longer wanted to be in. But some last stubborn ember of defiance, made me put them on. I had earned this. Even if no one else cared, I had to care for myself. I folded the disownment paper, that awful, heartless document, and put it in the pocket of my gown. A reminder. A weight to keep me grounded, so I wouldn't foolishly hope for a miracle. The auditorium was a sea of noise and color. Happy families buzzed with excitement, clutching bouquets of flowers and brightly wrapped gifts. The air was thick with the scent of perfume and anticipation. I found my seat among my classmates, their faces glowing with triumph and relief. I felt like a ghost among them. I pulled my robe tighter, the crinkle of the paper in my pocket a cruel secret. As the ceremony droned on, deans and faculty members giving speeches about bright futures and boundless potential, my mind drifted back to Ohio. I wondered if my parents ever thought of me, if they knew what day it was. I scanned the crowd, a foolish, hopeless part of me still searching for their faces in the vast, smiling audience. Of course, they weren't there. Then, they began calling the names for the dean's list. It was a special honor reserved for the top students in the college. I'd known I was on it, of course. My grades were one of the few things I could control, a point of pride in a life otherwise filled with uncertainty. But in the fog of my grief, I had almost forgotten. The dean called the names one by one. Each student stood, beaming, to a wave of applause from their particular corner of the auditorium. I clapped mechanically, lost in my own private sorrow. And then he said my name, Joyce Morgan. It was just 2 words, but they cut through the fog. I stood up, my legs feeling like water. The applause was polite, generic. I forced a small, tight smile and began to sit back down. But the dean wasn't finished. He leaned back into the microphone, his voice taking on a new, more significant tone. And now, for the presentation of the annual Founders Award for Innovation in Design. This is our highest honor, accompanied by a full tuition reimbursement and a guaranteed internship. The selection is made personally by our keynote speaker and benefactor, the CEO of Ethelred Industries, Mr. Alastair Finch. My breath hitched. The Founders Award? Everyone knew about it, but it was a mythical thing, a prize for the truly exceptional. I'd submitted my portfolio on a whim, never dreaming. The dean cleared his throat. This year's winner, he said, is a student whose portfolio, in Mr. Finch's own words, demonstrates a revolutionary fusion of technical precision and profound emotional narrative. It is the work of a true visionary. The award goes to Joyce Morgan. For a moment, the world stopped. The air was sucked out of the room. There was a beat of stunned silence, and then the auditorium erupted in applause. My classmates were patting me on the back, pushing me toward the aisle. I moved as if in a dream, my heart hammering against my ribs. I walked, dazed, toward the stage. The bright lights were blinding. I could see the dean in a tall, silver-haired man, Mr. Finch, standing there, holding a large, engraved plaque. As I climbed the steps, my eyes, adjusting to the light, instinctively scanned the front row of the audience. And that's when I saw them. My parents. They were sitting rigidly in 2 seats in the very front row. My mother was clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. My father's face was ashen, his jaw clenched so hard I thought it might crack. They weren't smiling. They weren't clapping. They were just staring. Frozen. The disownment paper in my pocket felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric of my gown, a stark, terrible contradiction to the scene unfolding before them. They had come. After everything, they had come. And in that single, earth-shattering moment, as the CEO called my name and the entire world applauded, they heard not just my name, but the utter destruction of every assumption they had ever held about me, my choices, and my future. They were frozen. And my world, which had been broken for so long, suddenly shattered into a million new, unrecognizable pieces. Walking across that stage to receive the Founders Award was the longest, shortest journey of my life. Each step was measured against the frozen tableau of my parents' faces. The applause was a roaring ocean in my ears, but all I could hear was the deafening silence of their shock. My hand, when I reached out to shake Mr. Finch's, was ice cold. He smiled, a warm, genuine crinkling around his eyes, and said something I didn't hear. He placed the heavy plaque in my arms, and the weight of it, both physical and symbolic, nearly buckled my knees. I managed a wobbly, tear-filled smile for the official photograph, then turned to walk back to my seat. My eyes were locked on my parents. My mother's gaze met mine for a fleeting second, and in it I saw not pride, but a profound, bewildered confusion. My father refused to look at me at all. His eyes were fixed on some distant point on the auditorium wall, as if by sheer force of will he could deny what was happening. The rest of the ceremony was a blur. Names were called, degrees conferred, caps were thrown into the air in a jubilant explosion of joy. I went through the motions, my body moving while my soul hovered somewhere above, watching the scene unfold. My classmates hugged me, their words of congratulation sounding like they were coming from the bottom of a deep well. Incredible, Joyce. We knew you had it in you. Your parents must be so proud. That last comment, from a well-meaning friend, was a knife twist. I just nodded, my throat too tight to form words. When the ceremony finally ended, a tide of people began to flow out of the auditorium. I stood by my seat, paralyzed, watching my parents. They stood up slowly, stiffly, as if they had aged a decade in the last hour. They didn't join the throng heading for the exits. They just stood there, two islands in a receding sea of happiness, waiting. I had to go to them. There was no other path. I clutched the Founders Award plaque to my chest like a shield and made my way through the thinning crowd. Each step felt like walking through setting concrete. The crinkle of the disownment paper in my pocket was a mocking soundtrack. I stopped a few feet in front of them. The air between us was charged, thick with unsaid words and 3 years of heartache. Mom, Dad, I said, my voice a fragile thread. You came. It was my mother who broke first. A single tear escaped and traced a path through her carefully applied powder. The college sent a letter, she said, her voice trembling. It said all graduating students' families were invited. We thought it would be a small thing. At the community hall. We didn't know. Her sentence trailed off, her gesture taking in the grand auditorium, the plaque in my arms, the lingering prestige in the air. My father finally looked at me. His eyes, usually so sure and commanding, were clouded with an emotion I couldn't name. Ethelred Industries, he said, his voice rough. Alistair Finch? Joyce, what is all this? It's the Founders Award, Dad, I said, my own voice gaining a little strength. It's for the top portfolio in the college. It comes with a full reimbursement of my tuition. And an internship. A reimbursement, he repeated, as if the word was foreign. But you had a scholarship. We thought you were. Getting by. I was waiting tables, Dad. 6 days a week. The scholarship only covered part of it. I took a shaky breath. I did get by, but it wasn't easy. The truth of my struggle hung in the air between us. They had pictured me languishing in a garret, playing at being an artist. They had not pictured me winning the highest honor, being praised by a CEO, having my debts wiped clean. My mother's eyes fell on the plaque. May I? She whispered. I handed it to her. She ran her fingers over the engraved letters of my name, her touch surprisingly gentle. Joyce Elizabeth Morgan, she read aloud, and her voice broke on my middle name, the one she had chosen for her own mother. We received your letter, I said, the words tasting like ash. I pulled the folded disownment paper from my pocket. I didn't hand it to them. I just held it, a small, white flag of surrender, or perhaps a declaration of war. My father flinched as if I'd brandished a weapon. The color drained from his face once more. He looked from the paper in my hand to the plaque in my mother's, and I could see the cognitive dissonance tearing him apart. The evidence of my failure in one hand, the proof of my monumental success in the other. "We thought we were protecting you," he said, his voice low and strained. "From a life of struggle. From disappointment. We thought your art was a phase. A rebellion." "It was never a rebellion," I said, tears finally spilling over. "It was a calling. It's who I am. You were so busy trying to give me the life you thought I should have, you never stopped to see the life I was trying to build for myself." The dam broke then. For 3 years, we had communicated only in shouts and silence, in legal documents and closed doors. Now, standing in the hushed emptiness of the auditorium, we finally spoke the truth. We were wrong. The words came from my father. They were quiet, simple, and they shattered the last of my defenses. I had waited 3 years to hear them. I had dreamed of them. But hearing them now, in this context, was almost too much to bear. "We were so terribly wrong," Joyce, my mother, echoed, her tears falling freely now. "We saw this, all these people clapping for you, that important man, and we realized we didn't disown a failure. We disowned a success. We disowned our daughter for being exactly who she was meant to be." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me, the plaque pressed between us. The hug was awkward, stiff with years of distance, but it was real. The scent of her perfume, the same one she'd worn my whole life, unlocked a floodgate of memories and grief. I sobbed into her shoulder, clutching her back. Over her shoulder, I saw my father. He stood, his shoulders slumped, the proud, unyielding patriarch finally defeated not by anger, but by the undeniable evidence of his own error. He looked old, and tired, and deeply, deeply sorry. He didn't join the hug, but he didn't walk away. He just waited. And when my mother and I finally pulled apart, he met my gaze. He began, then stopped, clearing his throat. "Can you ever find a way to forgive us, Joyce?" It was the question that had lived in my heart for 1,000 lonely nights. I looked at them, my mother's face ravaged by tears, my father's by regret. I thought of the lonely apartment, the relentless work, the cold finality of the paper in my hand. But I also thought of the dream that had sustained me. The dream they had just, in their own catastrophic way, validated. The thaw had begun. It was painful and raw, and the landscape it revealed was scarred and unfamiliar. But the ice had cracked. And for the first time in 3 long years, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't sorrow or anger or loneliness. It was the fragile, terrifying beginnings of hope. They didn't come back to my apartment that day. The chasm between us was still too wide, the wounds too fresh. We parted in the parking lot with promises to talk soon, promises that felt both fragile and momentous. My mother hugged me again, a little less stiffly this time. My father gave a curt, awkward nod, his eyes still full of a storm I couldn't quite read. I drove back to my shabby apartment above the laundromat, the Founders Award plaque sitting on the passenger seat like a distinguished guest. The disownment paper was still in my pocket. I took it out and laid it on the small Formica table in my kitchenette, placing the heavy plaque right on top of it. The 2 objects, one representing my deepest failure in their eyes, the other my greatest success, were now physically pressed together. I didn't know what to do with either of them. The phone call came 2 days later. It was my mother. Her voice was hesitant, soft. "Your father was wondering," she said, if it's not too much trouble, bring some of your artwork over to the house on Sunday. He'd like to see it." My heart leapt into my throat. This was it. The real test. The award had been an abstract concept, a title bestowed by a stranger. But my art was my soul, rendered in graphite and paint. It was raw, personal, and vulnerable. To show it to them was a risk far greater than seeing them on a graduation stage. Sunday arrived, a bright, clear Ohio day that felt cruelly at odds with the anxiety churning in my stomach. I carefully selected a portfolio of my best work, not just the sleek, professional designs that had won the award, but the personal pieces too. The detailed sketch of the old oak tree in their backyard. The portrait I'd done of my mother from memory, capturing the quiet sadness in her eyes I'd seen so often in my final years at home. The abstract painting that represented the feeling of the disownment paper, a slash of cold, legalistic gray across a warm, textured background of family colors. Walking up the path to my childhood home was like stepping into a photograph. The rose bushes were in full, glorious bloom, a riot of red and pink against the white siding. Everything was exactly the same, yet completely different. I rang the doorbell, my portfolio case feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My mother opened the door. She offered a small, nervous smile. "Joyce, come in." The house smelled the same of lemon polish and slow-cooked roast. It was a scent that used to mean comfort and safety. Now it felt like a museum of a life I'd been exiled from. My father was in his armchair, the one that had always been his throne. He didn't get up, but he set his newspaper aside. "Joyce," he said, his voice neutral. We made stilted small talk over coffee and a slice of my mother's lemon cake. The taste was a Proustian rush, a direct line to 1,000 happier afternoons. It was almost too much to bear. Finally, I could stand the tension no longer. "I brought my portfolio," I said, my voice too loud in the quiet room. My father nodded. "Let's have a look then." I unzipped the case on the living room carpet, my hands trembling. I laid the pieces out one by one, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I started with the safe ones, the technical architectural drawings, the product design sketches. My father leaned forward, peering at them through his reading glasses. He made no comment, his face an unreadable mask. Then I brought out the personal work. The portrait of my mother. She gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, Joyce," she whispered. You remembered my locket." I had. It was the small, silver locket my father had given her on their 20th anniversary. I had drawn it with painstaking detail. Then I laid down the painting, the one about the disownment. The gray slash across the warm, familial hues. I didn't explain it. I just let it sit there, a silent, screaming testament to my pain. The silence in the room was absolute. I couldn't look at them. I stared at the painting, bracing for the criticism, the dismissal, the confirmation that they still didn't understand. And then I heard a sound I hadn't heard in years. A choked, ragged sob. I looked up. It was my father. He had taken off his glasses and was pressing his fingers to his eyes, his shoulders shaking. My mother was crying silently beside him, her hand on his arm. "My God," my father choked out, his voice thick with tears. "My God, Joyce, what have we done?" He wasn't looking at the technical skill or the commercial potential. He was looking at the pain. And for the first time, he was truly seeing it. He was seeing me. This gray," he said, pointing a trembling finger at the painting. "This is us, isn't it? This is that damned paper." I could only nod, my own tears falling. He stood up, slowly, painfully, and walked over to me. He didn't hug me. Instead, he knelt down, right there on the carpet beside my portfolio, his knees cracking with the effort. He looked at the painting, then at the portrait of my mother, then at the sketch of his beloved oak tree. "All this time," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "we thought we were cutting away a diseased branch to save the tree. We never realized we were the disease. We were poisoning the roots." He reached out and his hand, rough and familiar, covered mine. It was the first time he had voluntarily touched me in 3 years. "It's magnificent, Joyce," he said, his eyes sweeping over the collection of my work. "It's all magnificent. And we are so sorry." That afternoon, the thaw became a reconciliation. We talked for hours. I told them about the loneliness, the fear, the moments I almost gave up. They told me about their own fear of the world's harshness, of seeing me struggle, of my dreams not being enough to sustain me. They had acted out of love, a love that was rigid and fearful, but love nonetheless. The disownment paper was never mentioned again. My mother later told me my father had taken it from the kitchen table that day and burned it in the backyard incinerator, watching the flames consume the words that had severed our family. The journey wasn't over. Trust, once broken, is not mended in a day. There were still awkward moments, lingering hurts. But we were trying. I started visiting every Sunday. My father, the pragmatic accountant, would pore over my business plans for the freelance design career I was launching, offering advice on taxes and invoices. My mother turned my old bedroom into a studio, insisting I keep my better supplies there. The internship with Ethelred Industries was a revelation. Alistair Finch became a mentor, and the work was challenging and exhilarating. I was no longer just Joyce the waitress or Joyce the disowned daughter. I was Joyce Morgan, award-winning designer. One evening, about 6 months after graduation, I was at my parents' house for dinner. My father was in the backyard, puttering with his roses. I went out to join him. The air was cool, the scent of the flowers rich and heady. He was standing before a new rose bush, one I hadn't seen before. It was a young plant, but it was already producing a single, stunning bloom. The petals were a complex, shifting palette of colors, warm golds and coppers at the center, deepening to rich, vibrant reds and purples at the edges. It was unlike any rose I had ever seen. "It's a new hybrid," my father said, noticing my gaze. "They call it the Phoenix variety, for its ability to come back even stronger after a harsh season." He snipped the single, perfect bloom with his shears and turned to me. "It made me think of you." He handed me the rose. Its fragrance was intense and beautiful. "Your mother and I," he paused, choosing his words with uncharacteristic care. "We had a picture of your life in our minds. It was a simple, black and white sketch. We thought we were protecting the lines. But you, Joyce, you didn't just color outside the lines. You created a whole new canvas. A masterpiece in colors we were too blind to see." I held the phoenix rose, its thornless stem cool in my hand. I looked from its impossible, beautiful colors to my father's face, now softened with a love and pride I had spent a lifetime yearning for. The old canvas, the one of expectation and disapproval, was gone, painted over by struggle and loss. The new one was still wet, its colors of grief, forgiveness, hard-won success, and a love that had been broken and remade, still blending into one another. It wasn't a perfect picture. There were shadows and rough textures. But it was authentic. It was complex. It was mine. And as I stood there in my father's garden, the scent of the phoenix rose filling the evening air, I knew, for the first time, that it was finally complete.